Hello, welcome to the Gridiron Show. I'm Gavin, alongside the editor of Gridiron magazine, Ollie, Connolly, and our features editor, Simon Clancy. And now that we are past the draft, I just can't let these two nerds continue to run riot over this thing without some kind of control over them. So as we start to look towards the off-season, OTAs, training camps, everything coming up in the not too distant future, we're starting our off-season program with a look at the coaches whose seats are already hot all the way back in May. Gents, firstly, I know we're a few weeks removed from the draft now, but as we start to get into training camps and the storylines that are starting to pick up for the off season, how are you all feeling? The schedule's out. Does everyone get excited about schedule release? Is that something that people get hyped about to plan trips out to the States, etc.?
Two nerds, did you say?
Yeah.
Outrageous.
Now we're just three nerds. It's fine.
I'm excited. This is my favorite time of year because I do, as you say, Will, the really nerdy analysis. This is the time of the year where you can't be wrong. You just get to ask questions. I'm just wondering what will they run? Will they run this? Will they run that? You don't have to actually have any expertise or true analysis because nothing can be wrong at this time of year.
Sounds like my time to shine.
I like the schedule release is about as interesting as a punch in the face, but I didn't say it. It was about as interesting as a punch in the face, but I did think that the Chargers schedule release, the anime, was absolutely outstanding. I thought that was one of the funniest things, and the little details in that were so good. You watch it 2 or 3 times, you pick up some bits of some genius moments. I'm also 10,000 words into another draft book, which I convinced myself I was never going to do again. Oh yeah, but look at this guy and look at this guy. So yeah, I mean, it's nerd central, quite frankly. So you were nail on the head there, Will.
I can't help myself. I have to, even if it is an overblown load of nonsense and another way they try to make the NFL a kind of 365 league, I still can't kind of start scanning through and going, right, if I go to the Niners-Mexico game, which is very much a hope and an aim for me this year, and then going, right, who's playing in Texas that weekend? I start poring over it. Who's on Thanksgiving? What games are we going to have on air? All that kind of thing.
We've got a Christmas Day in the Clancy household that kicks off with Miami hosting Green Bay. My missus is a Packers fan, so it's going to be an absolute Christmas-a-palooza.
How do you feel about 3 games on Christmas Day?
Amazing. For the Christmas NBA. Eve, 3 on Christmas Day. It's sensational stuff.
The sound of guys who are not having to have the discussion that they're working now on Christmas Day.
I mean, the idea that instead of having to watch Mrs. Brown's Boys, I get to watch Rams Broncos is sensational. I couldn't think of any better substitution, to be honest. Not that I know who I want to win that game, Russell Wilson against the Rams, but there we go. Look, let's get into this big question for this week then. The kind of way too early hot seat conversation. Which head coaches are under real pressure this year and have to perform in order to ensure that they've still got a job going into 2023? And it kind of comes back to that same point of conversation we've talked about previously around the draft, that the idea that people are making long-term plans for their organizations and the idea that they are thinking 3 years, 4 years into the future can never be the truth for a head coach or a GM who have to be thinking about their job security. So we're going to throw out a few each, see what sticks, maybe pick a bit of a consensus. I'll come to you first, Simon Clancy. What's the first name you want to throw out there for somebody who should be worrying already?
I've got 2 names, one of which is a bit of a wild card, which I'll throw later. The first one is Pete Carroll.
Ooh, okay.
Pete Carroll, it strikes me that the Pete Carroll, John Schneider axis, which has been so successful, feels a little bit like the last days of Arsene Wenger, for those of you that don't live in the UK and don't know who that is. He's a football manager who managed Arsenal incredibly successfully, Premier League team. But towards the end, it felt like, obviously there were problems, but it feels like there are only so many words that you can say to a team without beginning to repeat yourself. And it feels as if their run, which has been an excellent one, has come and is coming to an end. And I think, and I can't quite work out, I don't know whether you two have an opinion on this, but I can't quite work out whether or not they're buying themselves an extra year in the mind of Jody Allen, who took over as the owner in 2019. I can't work out if they're buying themselves an extra year by sitting with Drew Lock and thinking, well, we traded Russell Wilson away and this was always going to be a bridge year, and they've bought themselves an extra year and it's a really smart play. Or they've sort of given up hope, because as Ollie and I discussed nerdily over the last couple of weeks, we still can't quite get over the fact that Seattle is entering the year with Geno Smith and Drew Lock. So I think the time is beginning. I mean, Was he 70, 71?
If he gets any whiff that is the case, and I'm with you, I feel like this could almost be a bit of diversion away from that being the case. They've got a really, like, we joked about the schedule release this year, but they have to face a very strong NFC West, and they've got the AFC West out of division this year. It's going to be tough for them to have anything like a winning record, let alone anywhere near 500 with that quarterback. Do we think that there's any chance they do go and take that shot at, say, Baker Mayfield, because he's got to go, right, I've got to do something, otherwise I'm in real trouble?
How much is that helping out? You know, it kind of feels to me like the last days of the last.
Baker Mayfield is better than Drew Lock. It's helping out quite a bit.
But that's like saying, you know, who's the tallest dwarf? I mean,
the thing they've done, in fairness, is because they built such a system that was Russell centric. The nearest comparison in terms of play profile would be Baker. So it would be more seamless where they could just go, oh, dust off the 2019 playbook. Let's get that out. Now, Baker can't throw the ball down the field, which is Russell Wilson's superpower, which makes everything open up for them, and Baker Mayfield can't. So that's a problem. But if anyone is a perfect fit to go in there as a stopgap, I mean, it isn't Drew Lock. It would be Baker. And the only thing I'll push back on with the Pete Carroll thing is how they've tried to evolve, at least. I understand that the voice in the room, I mean, they've tried to change every player, seemingly. They've somehow bet on the Snyder Carroll axis rather than Russell Wilson. That seems to be the decision the owner made, which is a bit of a strange one. That they have radically transformed the defense. This is not the Seattle team of 2-3 years ago, particularly in terms of style, in terms of how they move, in terms of the kind of formations and alignments they're running. It looks nothing like it used to, even as some of his kind of, the guys he had around him, the Gus Bradleys of the world, have tried to cling on to that 3-match system. They ran with the Legion of Boom, and that's gone down in flames wherever he's walked to. They have tried to evolve and advance. And I think that's one thing you do get with Pete Carroll is there's always a willingness to just ditch whatever is not working and try something completely different. I mean, he just fired some of his best friends in the business. I mean, he was pretty ruthless there. So if you're going through this kind of, we're probably 3 years away cycle, the Rams are just too good. Arizona's got Kyler Murray. You know, it's going to take time for us to build the foundation. Then we'll go chase the quarterback. I think he's a pretty good guy to just keep around for 2 years, keep the thing, you know, there won't be major scandals. They'll be able to put decent things in place. Then maybe you get someone either off the staff or a younger guy who comes through and takes it in a couple of years.
It's an aging squad as well. I think the Seahawks are in for a really rough year this year. And actually, ironically, as much as we're saying he's on the hot seat, you feel like Carroll's coaching and the way that he kind of gets a locker room behind him, etc., might be the one thing that does get them to 6 wins or 7 wins. But I think it feels like right now that's a result in itself.
It just feels eerily similar to me to the last days of Mike McCarthy in Green Bay, who will be another coach who would potentially be on the hot seat in Dallas. But I just feel like at some point the Carroll race is beginning. It just feels like the race is run, and I can't see, you know, at what point with Drew Lock at the helm do they get to 1-6 or 1-5 and think, you know, this is going swimmingly and this is the direction of travel that we want to go in with a guy who's going to be 70. I know he's contracted through 2025, but
it would be really wild to be like, we're going to roll with Pete and John and then just like finish the thing off 12 months later after letting Russell Wilson go. It's just in terms of franchise valuation as a new owner, it's like, why did I do that again? It's just a very bizarre choice.
But also the ownership, I suppose it's a new owner in that because Paul Allen died. So it's not like a new owner. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to get rid of the guy that's made your team relevant for the past 10 years, won a Super Bowl, the 19th winningest coach in NFL history, etc., etc.
Here's the question I'll throw it to you, Si. If Pete Carroll, because you would imagine they do the Wenger thing, right? He's retiring. He wasn't pushed. And then he leaks, I was very much pushed. I wanted to stay forever. Do you think that Pete Carroll would coach again in the NFL? Because I think he would do. I think Dan Snyder or one of these older guys, even Jerry, would be like, give me a 2-year run with Pete Carroll.
It wouldn't surprise me, actually. It wouldn't surprise me. I would have thought that, you know, for example, someone like Jacksonville would have felt like a good place if Doug Peterson hadn't been there. But it wouldn't surprise me if he coached again. Absolutely, he doesn't seem to me to be the guy that just says, "Oh, that's it. I want to." He's like Roy Hodgson. If we're going to continue the footballing analogy,
the tenuous football nonsense. Yeah, exactly. But I'm not going to lie; it'll feel more like his run at Watford than his run at Palace if that does happen. Look, you threw his name out there, so I'll throw out there Mike McCarthy because I think it was going to be one of the ones we discussed today. It became a hot name the moment that Sean Payton announced that he was stepping away from a year from the Saints, and he's been often linked with that job in Dallas. And okay, so 2 years under Mike McCarthy. First year, they get the Dak injury. They go, 6-10, and it's yeah, it's not a great year, but there's things they can point the finger to. They have this bit of a resurgence in year 2, 12-5, go to the playoffs, but yeah, they lose to 49ers team they probably should beat on paper. And the fact is that regardless of what happened with Dak Prescott or not, and whether Sean Payton's out there or not, consistently when Mike McCarthy faces good teams or good coaches, he gets out coached and outplayed regardless of the talent on the field. I don't actually think he's very good at the job anymore, but I think he's got a talented enough roster in an NFC East where he should realistically go and win that division without needing to be very good at his job.
The thing that's really tough for Mike McCarthy is his kind of the point of having Mike McCarthy is he's quite a good, and I know it doesn't always come across in press conferences or in the media. He's basically a philosopher of the game. He reads a ton. He studies more than anyone, and he is really, really good at knowing where the game is going, where the mini trends are, and where he can kind of squeeze out 3-5% advantage out of a roster. And he does that kind of at the macro level. Then he hands that to the coaching staff and says, you figure out the game plan with this kind of long-term vision. So you see what Kellen Moore does with that offense. We saw what happened with Aaron Rodgers. He basically instituted the system that Matt LaFleur is still running with Rodgers. Now, Matt LaFleur is a genius because it's working with Rodgers, whereas McCarthy was an idiot in the final days of the Rodgers era. So that's kind of his role. Now, once you've done that, it's kind of over, right? And then as a head coach, he doesn't call plays on offense, doesn't call plays on defense, doesn't have any hand in the week-to-week game planning on offense and defense for the most part, maybe some ideas here or there. So he's reduced to being the timeout guy. And he might be the worst timeout guy in recent football history. So it is very much like, what is his job then on a day-to-day basis? He is no longer involved. The philosophy that they've built around Dak Prescott exists. They picked up Peyton Manning's offense from Denver, sprinkled on some Boise State goodness and said, here we go, let's have a great offense, which works sometimes and it's been poor in other stretches too. That's job done. The thing that he has to worry about is not even the Sean Payton thing of could Payton come down from the booth mid-season? Would he come, after a year sabbatical? Dan Quinn's right there. Dan Quinn is probably regretting that he turned down that Denver job because Russell Wilson skedaddled over there like a fortnight later, and he probably wishes he took it. So Dan Quinn, I'm sure there was some assurance. Look, if this is going off the rails after 5 weeks, we'll get rid of Mike, and you can at least have a run with that defense and being the head honcho with the franchise for 10 weeks, 12 weeks into a playoff run. You're right, Will. They should comfortably win the NFC East, but for them, it's all just about playoff games. And I do really believe that by the time the playoffs roll around, Dan Quinn will be the head coach and not Mike McCarthy.
There was this idea that, with Aaron Rodgers' future unsure, with Tom Brady gone from Tampa Bay, that earlier in the year that Dallas should be entering the fray as one of the favorites, put them alongside the Rams as the reigning title holders. Now you kind of look at it and you think, you'd fancy any of the other division winners if the favorites go on to win it to beat them in the divisional round, if not losing a wild card game again like they did last year. I don't know. Nothing about it inspires me. But then Dan Quinn did a very good job with that defense last year, and particularly, made himself look like an absolute genius with the way he used Micah Parsons. Is that enough for him to get another head coaching opportunity after it didn't happen in Atlanta, though?
He also has that kind of CEO persona. That was almost the gold dust in Atlanta. He wasn't very hands-on with the defense in Atlanta once it was installed because they were running such a simplistic Seattle-style one there. He's become more hands-on with it in Dallas, and we saw what that was last year. It was a disaster the year before. It was excellent last season. The big problem they have is just defensive performance is not stable year to year. You go up, you go down. They do not have the playmakers they had last year. Now you go through the roster and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, that felt much deeper last year. Oh, they looked a lot more athletic last year. Oh, I really like when Randy Gregory played 25 snaps as the best sub rusher in the league. When the guy coming off the bench now is not Randy Gregory, that looks quite light. So if I was them, you could not in any way. It would be a minor miracle for Dan Quinn to get the exact same performance level out of that team, or even 5-10% here. I think that they should be planning on that being middle of the pack with some dynamic playmakers, Diggs, Parsons, Lawrence, who could maybe swing them a playoff game, but they cannot rely on that thing. What they need massively is serious improvement on the offensive side of the ball. That thing has to be more consistent, has to be more explosive, cannot just be about Kellen Moore coming up with cool payoff plays and cool trickery. Has to be a sustained machine that regularly posts 30 points a game just throughout and just marches through good defenses. If they don't have that, given where they've put their chips in the salary cap, then they're in trouble.
I don't think this is a better team than it was last year either. That's the concern for me. You look at the roster, you look at what they did in the draft. I thought the draft was fine, but you lose Amari Cooper. you lose a Randy Gregory. So much was made about what Trayvon Diggs did, but let's be realistic and dig into something beyond the numbers. Trayvon Diggs was at times a liability, especially down the field. He gave up a number of big plays down the field, which you're not seeing guys like Jair Alexander or Jalen Ramsey or Xavier Howard give up with the regularity that Diggs did. Yes, he got a lot of turnovers, but there's a lot more to it than that. What I found really interesting about McCarthy is, remember when he was out of football and he hired the guy, or he was talking about he was working with the guy from what's the game show? Is it Jeopardy? It might have been Jeopardy, but one of the game shows. And Peter King went and did the sit down interview with him, and he was literally talking about how all of a sudden he got so into analytics that when he got a coaching job, he was going to hire the guy who'd won Jeopardy like on 6 occasions. That would be his like. And I was thinking, what on earth is this? I know that analytics, this is just straight bonkers. And I don't think he's got any better as a head coach. And also, I don't think that, cruising through the NFC East last year to a 12-5 record is absolutely fine. But that's a base minimum, I think, for me, if you're head coach of the Dallas Cowboys at the moment in that division. It can't be. Just winning the division should not be seen as a hallelujah moment. It has to be getting deep into the playoffs. It has to be NFC Championship games. It has to be Super Bowls. And I just don't think that he's good enough. B, I don't think this roster's good enough. And C, I don't think that Jerry Jones will hang around too long. And whether that is Dan Quinn, whether that is Kellen Moore, or more obviously Sean Payton, which I think is probably the answer. I think, this time next year we'll be sitting here talking about how Sean Payton is the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys.
Go on then, throw us one out, Ollie. We've got a couple of big ones we've missed.
Yeah, let's get the Matt Rhule one out the way then, shall we? Because they, as we've said throughout the offseason, that whole infrastructure brain trust there, which is Matt Rhule, right? He hired everyone. He hired like canteen staff. It was the most wild thing. Classic new owner syndrome. I will go and get the rah-rah college coach who's never been in a professional program and allow him to hire my canteen staff. How does that make any sense? I don't understand. And they are essentially fired unless proven otherwise, right? That could be in season to try and get a head start on the Sean Payton sweepstakes. That could be at the end of the year to go and get the next hot shot. I really thought they should have done it this offseason, but they're going to give it one more swing, and they had hoped to try and microwave some success by going and getting one of the big name quarterbacks. They just couldn't pull off any of those deals. And so now they roll in with Sam Darnold or insert name of Matt Corral as a rookie, or trying to go and get Garoppolo or going to get Baker Mayfield, and it just does not look good for them.
Yeah, I mean, I loved Matt Rhule coming out. I thought he'd be a great head coach in the NFL. I really liked what he did. But everything just feels so wrong about it. And and I think it goes back to the inability, and it's not just his fault, but the inability to get a quarterback just puts them in a no-win situation. If you're David Tepper sitting out there, you've got to be thinking that A, what was it about our ball club that meant that we couldn't land a quarterback? And B, then does that if we get into a situation of bidding war and this time next year with teams like the Dallas Cowboys, with teams like the Arizona Cardinals, with teams like the Washington Commanders, are we going to win a head-to-head battle for Sean Payton? The answer is probably no. So Ollie's point is absolutely apposite. At what point in a struggling Carolina season, which I suspect will happen because Sam Darnold's a quarterback, and you're relying on an injury-addled, Christian McCaffrey. I know that there are young players on the roster that I like, but you are expecting a hell of a jump up from an awful lot of young players to be able to get into a position in which this is not a fireable season for Matt Rhule. And I just think that you can't get into a shootout situation with those teams that I mentioned if you feel like Sean Payton is the answer, because you're just going to lose out.
Although Tepper still remains, as of discussion, because the Broncos deal hasn't gone through, he's the richest owner in the league. So
yeah, absolutely.
He could just keep adding zeros, man, until Sean Payton decides, you know what, Carolina, not so bad after all.
He could do.
I'm there's a little bit of me that's surprised he's even still there now. He followed the playbook of a guy who's on his way out. Yeah. He fired a coordinator mid-season because he was blaming them rather than taking the blame on himself. And Joe Brady's a guy who was linked with head coaching jobs. People were very excited about coming into the league. And okay, you lose Christian McCaffrey. And I've seen those rare Panthers fans who still feel some shred of hope talking about how good they did look through 3 games when McCaffrey was there, which admittedly they played well to start the season. But Yeah, I don't know. There's part of me that feels like if this was a more experienced owner and a situation where, okay, yes, you've got the young players there, but there was a clear development path, maybe a quarterback coming in, that maybe they were just holding on to Matt Rhule for essentially having him for the year there till they got the guy they actually wanted. But
I think Rhule could be a good head coach. I think he could be a good second-time head coach. He made two really bad decisions, which was he got Phil Snow, who everyone likes as DC, running really creative stuff that they did together in college. And he tried to get ahead of the game in terms of where the league was going, and he just bet on it 2 years too early. And it's too hard to run such a specific scheme in the NFL because you only have 20 odd players that you're rolling through on a game day. It's not like at Baylor where you can have 4 specialists running the same thing and you just cycle through one athlete, next athlete, next athlete. You can recruit hyper specifically in college football to build a certain scheme. In the NFL, you have to be more malleable. You're only dressing a certain number of guys. Everyone's injured all the time, and you have to go and get street free agents to slot in on a week's notice, and they can't be running a very specific one-off thing that just that guy does on a game day. So he made the wrong bet on Phil Snow, I think a couple of years too early, and then he made the wrong bet on Joe Brady, who he took at the height of his powers running one of the blandest systems in college football that happened to have first rounders galore and one of the most special quarterbacks ever play the game. And I like Joe Brady, but he knew he couldn't bring that offense to the NFL, right? And they brought a completely different offense to the NFL. So he brought the hotshot guy from college to run this really snazzy RPO-based offense to then not run that offense in the NFL when he probably should have just got a tried and true Shanahan type person, right? And his whole thing is I'm CEO, I'm program builder. And those are the two massive whiffs that he made essentially. So I do think he'll talk another owner in somewhere to getting a job. And I'm with you, Will. If the owner wasn't so tempestuous, I think they try and ride it out and give him another chance. But the problem is now he's spinning his wheels because, as you mentioned, he knifed Joe Brady, threw him completely under the bus, and then was just poison to the coaching community, right? When he has to go and get McAdoo from wherever McAdoo was hiding out and say, here's my rock star OC. It's Ben McAdoo.
I've got 3 more names on my list. So Simon, you said you had a left field one. Let's see if that's one of them.
So this is a left field name, and I do not expect this person to be fired, but I do think, and I also really like them. I think you talked myself out of it.
Enough
already.
Caveats.
Yeah. So Frank Reich.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely on my list.
I had him down. And that has as much to do with Jim Irsay's like bizarre postseason comments where out of nowhere he was like, yeah, I considered firing everyone. It's like, whoa. That wasn't on any, that wasn't on the radar. It was
just
Carson
stood outside
Wentz.
a private plane rambling to a camera where you couldn't really hear what he was saying, but maybe that's for the best.
Like, I get that you pin almost all of that collapse at the end of the season onto Carson Wentz, right? But I feel like that, when are we going to acknowledge that Reich also has a lot of responsibility for what happened there as well? Because, he was the guy that brought him in. He was the guy that vouched for him. He was the guy that sort of talked about how he was his like second son. I just think that there have always been these sort of slightly tumultuous stretches during a Colts season that he's been at the helm at. And I can't really work out why, because I think he's an excellent leader of men. I think he's a really good coach. I think he's a great front office with Chris Ballard and Ed Dodds. They've got good players. You go through that roster and you look at, position by position. Generally, it's full of really good players or really good under the radar players. They've always found good guys that they can draft. Where that there is a disconnect somewhere. Maybe that's ownership. Maybe that's, and I feel like he's almost been bailed out by the Matt Ryan trade. But at some point, the rubber's got to meet the road with Frank Reich, and they've got to get a decent push into the playoffs, because it's a playoff team that's not getting into the playoffs.
The defense took a big drop off as well last year, despite having excellent talent at every level. And okay, Eberflus is now gone and actually gone and got himself a head coaching job despite his bad second half of the year last year. You've got to rely on both sides of the ball to do well. And so Gus Bradley has to come in and hit the ground running as well. And he should do with the players they've got on that side of the ball. Can't see why he wouldn't.
Say that, but Gus Bradley's defenses have been a horror show for 6 years now. He just has refused to move with the times of the game. I mean, you can go through every single time the Chiefs look like they're in trouble. They played a Gus Bradley defense and they got right back on track. They would just hang 40 on him, and it was teaching tape of how to shred cover 3. Just one after last year. Teams figured out Patrick Mahomes. Everyone's playing too deep. Gus Bradley, bleep that. I'm doing cover 3 and I'm rolling strong. And there goes the ball flying past everyone's head, and Patrick Mahomes is dropping 45 on his head 2 out of 3 weeks. So I know. I mean, the Eberflus thing is mad because they were never that good under him, really. I mean, the style they played, it was so conservative and restrictive that they kind of juice their own figures to help themselves out in terms of the numerical department. I think they ended up finishing like 8th in defensive efficiency anyway last year, but they looked bad for large stretches at the second half of the year. And they rely so much on turnover luck. And, Darius Leonard is on pace to be the greatest forced fumbler in the history of the game. And can that just continue year after year after year? He is a really special player, but that is just not a skill that traditionally carries over unless you're Peanut Tillman and you create a new brand of doing this thing, which he is not. So, yeah, that would be a concerning one for me with him. As we mentioned, Irsay is going to be looking for any excuse because he's just that kind of owner. And they've done move after move at the quarterback spot. And the next one you would just imagine would be changing the coach for coach's sake, even though I just stick with him. I would stick with him. I'd try and find a better defensive coordinator. That would be my long-term plan.
The issue for me, I think, and you go through that roster and you kind of feel like quarterback, they're in decent hands with Matt Ryan, running back obviously with Jonathan Taylor, but they picked up CJ Verdell, they drafted Devonta Price, Naeem Hines is there. Wide receiver is a bit of an issue. Alec Pierce has been really good apparently the first couple of days, but it is mini camp in terms of rookie mini camp, obviously alongside Michael Pittman. Tight ends are fine. There's a question mark about left tackle. Is Bernard Ryman going to play there? And then defensively, you look at that defensive line, and DeForest Buckner, you got Yannick Ngakoue, who they did the Rocky Sin trade with, Dayo Odeyingbo, who I really liked out of Vanderbilt, Kwity Paye, obviously the first round of last year. Linebackers are strong, apart from Darius Leonard. Bobby Okereke or Okere, however he wants to pronounce his name this week. He's like Andy Cole. The question for me is cornerback, actually, and what can they get out of Stephon Gilmore? Because Kenny Moore is a great slot guy, but in terms of outside corners, I like the safeties. I think Julian Blackman's a really good player. But if they can get a tune out of Stephon Gilmore, then
Gilmore was excellent in Carolina last year, and they played him inside a lot, and they played him inside and off, which is interesting and absolutely nothing like he's ever played before. And I'm guessing because he was breathing heavily for the first 6 weeks, because I think he'd been in Miami for 12 weeks having a good old time. So that's interesting because he just does not really fit the Gus Bradley MO. So I have no idea where they're going to line him up. But if they can get even the Carolina level out of him, that is a huge move for them. If they can somehow get anywhere near the Patriots one, then that is something pretty special. I just don't think that defensive line's very good. I think Buckner's good, but you can double someone inside, and Ngakoue is not a good player. He's a name player. He doesn't play very well. And they only brought him in because he's Gus Bradley's guy, and they run such a specific scheme. And the fact that they are so in on the Gus Bradley experience in 2022 is the thing that would worry me. That was something the head coach has decided he wants to do. As you mentioned, Si, him and Ballard work together on the personnel stuff. So they've clearly decided they're going with that style of defense, and that's just not going to work in 2022.
Yeah, and what you're asking for on that defensive line as well is those two, the first and second round pick from last year that I mentioned, Odeyingbo and Paye, to really step up and have big seasons. I mean, 4 sacks for Kwity Paye last year. I'm not even sure how many Dayo had, half a sack last year. So you're expecting 4.5 sacks to go up to the close to the 20s, aren't you? And that's a hell of a leap for 2 players.
Ollie, go on, throw us out another one.
It's got to be Lovie Smith with the Texans. God love him. God love Paul Lovie, because they didn't want him in the first place, right? They wanted Josh McCown. They weren't allowed to hire Josh McCown because Josh McCown has never coached at any level of football. And they were involved in a lawsuit about hiring people who would jump in the front of the line ahead of minority coaches. So they're like, oh, bleep, we're going to have to go and hire a minority coach. And they picked Lovie Smith from their staff, when, on reflection, they should have just kept David Culley for another year and let him keep rolling that thing. And they're most likely going to be bad. I actually think that they had a really good draft, for an organization that just is walking incompetence. I thought they had an excellent draft, and I think they're going to have some foundational pieces there, as long as the whole thing doesn't come dismantled by what will likely be a lot of losing, and just, if a loser culture sets in and stuff starts happening off the field. That's the only thing I think could get them, but they're just not going to win enough games. And I imagine that they're just doing this Lovie Smith thing for an 8-week to 1 year stopgap until they can go and get someone who they really want, which would be off that Patriots tree, or would be McCown.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I mean, it just feels like it feels like God, what's his name? I was going to say David Tepper. He was the coach.
The McNairs.
No. Who was the coach before?
Culley.
Yeah, it feels like David Culley 2.0, doesn't it? I mean, I agree. I truly believe they wanted to hire Josh McCown until the whole sort of Brian Flores situation led them to that sort of slightly less controversial decision of hiring their current defensive coordinator. I actually don't think he was too bad in Chicago, but I think the Tampa Bay years were an absolute disaster. I mean, I love a man with a good beard, but that's not going to necessarily take you to the promised land. I think it's an interesting transitional year in a way for Houston. You know, you talk about the players. You know, this is obviously I like Davis Mills coming out of Stanford. 13 games he played, but I thought he had a really nice upside, and you saw a little bit of that last season. You're obviously expecting guys like Damian Pierce, the kid they drafted out of Florida, to step up because the running back situation is not great. You know, reliance obviously on Brandon Cook staying healthy, but you kind of look at the names and you think, you know, if Nico Collins trains on a bit, if John Mechie's recovered from the injury, you know, there's some, you know, if Brevin Jordan, you know, steps up, obviously offensive line is in a significantly better place than it was. And the Deshaun Watson years, obviously question marks about Larry Tunsil and his health, but Titus Howard and those guys. And then defensively, there's some interesting names that, you know, people around the league don't necessarily know about, but it feels like an interesting nucleus being put together, but it just doesn't feel like a nucleus that is going to be winning a lot of games. And I think that will ultimately, but you kind of wonder, like, where are they going to go? Do you know what's their...
The thing that's mad for them is their best players are players they should try and trade. Like, I don't know why on their timeline they refused to move Brandon Cooks last year.
Yeah.
I know he gets moved every year, but they were offered second round picks last year. They're like, we're only doing it for 2 1s or nothing at all. It's like, why? What are you guys trying to achieve? Laramie Tunsil, right? They just got to take the L on the deal and move it. That those guys that are their best, most impactful players outside of this rookie class that I think is really talented are guys they should absolutely be trying to drain as much value out as possible.
Yeah, no, I agree. Jonathan Greener's a good player. You know, you're expecting a lot out of Stingley and Jalen Petrie to step up early on, but it just feels like there's just not enough talent and probably not enough belief in Lovie Smith. They kind of, you know, like Ollie said at the top, it felt like they kind of had to make that hire, and that's never going to end well.
And they were a terrible defense last year, and you know they put all that value into Derek Stingley, and there is not a worse fit in the league really than Derek Stingley going to play in a Lovie Smith defense. So they're already probably looking at each other like, oh man, the most valuable guy in our building now is not a fit in the scheme of the head coach.
Yeah.
I think people who have been long-term fans of the show will have seen my next name coming. Kliff Kingsbury.
I forgot about Kliff.
I mean, how do you forget about Kliff?
I forgot about Kliff. It's because we've been nailing him for 3 weeks straight.
Right. I
didn't choose him because I thought it'd be so obvious we choose you, and all the Arizona fans hate me for you know.
Seriously, outside of the fact that they're going to be missing DeAndre Hopkins at the start of the season, and they make a dreadful trade for Marquise Brown, who is barely a number 2 receiver, has bad hands, and has been, okay, maybe he goes into a system where he knows the quarterback, and that's going to keep them happy. But there's no way that what they paid for him was reasonable by any stretch of the imagination. They're going to be starting the year at wide receiver with who knows what AJ Green is at this point, although better last year than I expected him to be. Marquise Brown and Rondale Moore. It's very gadgety potentially. And then there's this whole thing about how in the second half of the year, as we all know, Kliff Kingsbury drops off and falls off a cliff. So when you've got to start hot, you've got no DeAndre Hopkins, who was basically the entire crux of your offense last year. This and okay, we mocked the schedule release and everything else. Can I just give you their second half of the season schedule for the Arizona Cardinals? From week 10 onwards, they're at the Rams, the 49ers in Mexico, the Chargers, the Patriots, at the Broncos, Buccaneers. Admittedly, they have the Falcons 1 week from on the penultimate week of the season, but then they finish the season at the 49ers. They could easily go 1-8 down that stretch.
Hey, don't rule out the fighting Desmond Ridders. You know?
Don't rule out 0-9, mate. I mean...
So honestly, they cannot ignore it. If they somehow limp to another wildcard spot, even they cannot ignore that fact.
The problem they have is they've just given him a 4-year deal. Now maybe they'll want to get out of it, but Bidwell is not. I mean, but Bidwell is due. No, he has been very much about the medium term. He always gives guys time. He buys into wholeheartedly whatever is presented to him in the interview. He's like, yes, and we'll follow that through to its natural conclusion. And Kingsbury's in the fortunate position of his quarterback's too good to get him fired. So he'll probably, look his way into 9 games baseline, and then maybe he can help them win 1. Probably not. The biggest concern he has is how bad that defense looks. And I love Vance Joseph, and what they did last year was some of the coolest, wildest shit you will ever see a defense do. Amazing. And then he got stuff out of that defense. They had absolutely no right getting out of it once J.J. Watt went down. And I know it fell off a cliff, but if you go and watch the tape, man, it's that they are outrageous of what they do. They could have been the worst defense in the league based on some of the personnel they're rolling out there in certain weeks. To then rip Chandler Jones out of that, no chance. And to think JJ Watt will be healthy the full season, no chance. Think Marcus Golden can do that again, who's a player I love, but is always injured, no chance. they are in. And then they put all the chips into trying to address an offense that was like, that was not the issue, guys. The issue was not having quick, small players. You have plenty of those. You can go find those guys all over the place. The issue is the entire design and the reliance, like you said, Will, on our entire game plan is second and medium, third and long, throw the ball up to D-Hop and hope for the best.
I think we're all in agreement on that one. I don't think there's any need to.
I hate Kliff Kingsbury. I think he's a terrible coach. And as Ollie and I discussed last week or the week before, and you just made the point there, Will, is that when it gets to mid-season, they always start really strong, and then teams just go back and look at how vanilla they are on offense. Like down the stretch last season was an absolute embarrassment. It was an embarrassment. It was a high school offense, couldn't move the ball. I mean, some of those games, the playoff game was an absolute. I mean, if I was Steve Keim, I'd have taken a vein at halftime. It was so bad. It was just, you look at that defensive line and you just think, how are they ever going to get the way they have to create to get to the quarterback is, I mean, they're going to have to use Isaiah Simmons, Jesse Luketa, Maya J. Sanders, and Zaven Collins to pretty much on every down to try and get to the quarterback because nobody else is getting there. Certainly not on that defensive line because, like Ollie says, a big fan of Marcus Golden, JJ Watt. How many games can you rely on him on? And you've just taken, probably a very under the radar Hall of Famer type player in Chandler Jones out of that system. So. Yeah, I just think he's so overrated. I think he's and also the other question is, look, what's Kyler's mental state of mind coming into this season? Where is he in terms of the whole situation with his contract and those sorts of things?
The health is the big thing for him too. He's been banged up. Those second half of the year splits have as much to do when you watch him. He's not as quick in the second half of the year. He's tentative taking off, and they explode out the gates because they're playing one-on-one football across the board, and they have the quickest quarterback in the league. So if he's playing one-on-one against you, Lamar's slipperier. Kyler's quicker in a straight line, so he outruns everyone. It's proven now you cannot do that for a 21-game season to win a Super Bowl. So you have to do what the Bills did with Josh Allen, which is we are running the worst offense in the league for 8 weeks because we don't care because we'll win games because that guy's special. And then as the season goes on, we'll do all the creative stuff and we'll save it for AFC title games, for AFC divisional rounds. They go the complete other way and they throw everything out the gate right up top, like Sai said, and then everyone's seen it once and Kyle's getting hit too much and he slows down in the second half of the year.
But look at the players they've got, and if Kingsbury had any sense, you would alter this offense to make it much more tight end heavy, extra tight end personnel. Because the strength of your team is Zach Ertz, Trey McBride, Max Williams in terms of what you can do. Because without D-Hop for the first 6 games, I mean, you're looking literally at Hollywood Brown, 94-year-old AJ Green, and Rondale Moore, who hasn't stayed healthy since his junior season in high school. The running back situation, obviously James Conner scored 20 touchdowns last season. That's great. But, Chase Edmonds is gone. You're relying on Eno Benjamin, who's not done a great deal. I don't see how they're going to move the ball consistently beyond Kyler just having to run around like a mad thing. And then, taking extra hits behind an offensive line that's not very good. And then a defense that can't get to the quarterback and therefore can't stop anybody.
Okay, so
and I'm here for his downfall.
Yeah. It will be a day of celebration when it happens, even if it's within division. And I quite like the fact that he's quite bad. Firstly, are there any obvious ones we're missing? Is there anything we've not thrown out there, like Kliff Kingsbury, where we're going to look back on this? How on earth did we not mention?
The only one I can think of that we haven't discussed is like this Patriots OC situation, which is like they just won't hire. They're all looking at each other. Apparently, Joe Judge failed, special teams ace failed, head coach. He's going to run the offensive line for reasons that are unclear. Matt Patricia, defensive wizard, failed head coach. He's going to run the offense in part, but not call the plays. Bill Belichick will call the plays and design the game plan, even though he's doing the defensive game plan.
Steve Belichick's doing special teams. Can we ask a genuinely serious question about the longitude of Bill Belichick's
Don't do it.
I mean,
don't do it.
Feels like a legitimate question we've asked about another man who
he's obviously never going to get sacked. But at what point, if you're Robert Kraft, do you think this looks like
Did he not just take the guy who was the 4th drafted quarterback and make him the best rookie quarterback in the league without a receiver who could separate from man coverage? Did we not just watch that last year?
He wasn't actually that good down the stretch.
Was he?
There's no one open.
He was the best rookie quarterback in a class which underwhelmed in their rookie.
But he was fine. His league average from a rookie is pretty good, and no one separated from man coverage. That defense was unbelievable for 12 weeks until they all got hurt. I don't know. You guys, you want to put all stuff on the grave? You go ahead. I'm not going to be the one to do it.
It's a totally separate conversation. It is a totally separate conversation that's maybe for a different podcast. Mm-hmm. By the end of this season, he is the third best quarterback from that class, maybe the fourth. Like, I think once people have had more times in a system, once people have better things around them, I think Trevor Lawrence takes a leap this year. I'm going to throw out that I think Trey Lance is going to be good this year, and I don't care what anyone says. Like, I think actually Mac Jones, like you say, league average. He might be league average, and they'll be happy with that. But
at the end
I'm
of the season,
buying that it was some, phenomenal thing that they achieved.
At the end of the season, where will Mac Jones be ranked in NFL quarterbacks from Alabama? 1, 2, or 3.
Well, behind Bryce, if Bryce is then eligible.
Oh yeah. The guys that are in the league this season, where will he be ranked?
I still think first.
Fuck off.
I didn't even finish my rant about last year's draft class, where I think Zach Wilson takes a bit of a step forwards this year. And even though Justin Fields is surrounded by a crap show in Chicago, I think he personally will be seen as a good player. So, I'm just saying there's 4 other quarterbacks there who got a chance to move ahead of Mac Jones this year. I'm going to throw out one, despite what I just said about Trey Lance, though. And I think Kyle Shanahan is under more pressure than people kind of will realize from the outside right now, mostly because of another offseason of horrible coaching departures. Mike McDaniel's obviously being a big one for him and what they do with that scheme there. But this whole Deebo Samuel situation, as much as people want to point towards money, his usage, the whole running back wide receiver thing, from what I understand, the departure of Wes Welker was a big, big part of why Deebo Samuel isn't happy in San Francisco right now. And Wes Welker had a contract on the table to stay, and they just didn't offer him enough money to keep him in the building. He went with Mike McDaniels. Apparently, what they offered him was insulting. So if that is true, and Kyle Shanahan ends up having a bad year this year, and he's made players unhappy, he's made coaches unhappy, I just think that it could be a shock one at the end of the year where they suddenly look and go, actually, I know there's been the injuries and everything, but we've really only had one great season and one good season. There's a bit of a Mike Shanahan thing here where he could get to a point where he's just pissed off enough people that they just decide it's not worth it. It might not be this year, but I just think I can't see him being there another 10 years right now. That's for sure.
There's always a shocker, and he's a good one to have on the list. I just feel like, and maybe I'm just more removed from you, Will, who's probably following it more intimately day to day, that if anyone was going to go, it would be John Lynch, and they would do 1 year of a plaster at GM with Kyle there. That if he left, he would be the most sought after coach in the market, irrespective of the actual record. The reputation is so bonkers. And if you're any of these coaches saying, well, let's go and grab one of these guys from the McVay or Shanahan tree, oh wait, I could just go grab the guy who is the tree. He would be, David Tepper would throw all the money in the world in to go to Carolina. And so once that starts percolating in those final weeks of the season, I just can't imagine San Francisco being up for allowing that to happen and then jumping back into the Jim Tom Sula sweepstakes and all the terrible coaches they had, post Harbaugh.
Like I say, I think it's a left field one, but he sits in potentially in that same, to mention previous coaches, Jim Harbaugh region of someone who may just, and if we want to go back to the football analogies, Jose Mourinho, Antonio Conte, those guys who can have 3 or 4 brilliant years, but will never get enough people on sides to have a long-term placement somewhere. I'm not saying I think it's, I'm not suddenly saying he's got a hot ass right now, but I just think that a bad start to the year and people might start suddenly looking and going, actually, is this one we should be worried about?
The one I would keep an eye on, which is a bit left field, is Robert Saleh, because I think he is widely regarded as being a good head coach who's in a bad situation where it's a bad Jets team and they're at the start of the rebuild. And I think that is true. They also had the worst defense in the NFL last year by efficiency, and Atlanta finished with 18 sacks. So to be that bad is like you were trying to throw games, which I don't think they were trying to do down the stretch. And Zach Wilson is so bad that it's like not even funny at this point. I mean, Sai, I know you and I talked about it last week, and I went back to watch him. I was in the middle of rewatching him when we spoke about it, and that the first 6 weeks are such an apocalypse. If you go through the advanced metrics and EPA, extra points added per play, they would have been better off with him throwing the ball in the ground for 6 weeks straight than him dropping back to take a pass. That's never happened for more than a game in the history of the NFL, ever. And he did it for 6 weeks straight. There'd be more value in just ditching the ball every single play. Then he gets okay-ish after he returns from the injury for those final 4 or 5 weeks, whatever it is, and yet it was still terrible. It just went from apocalypse to a regular old disaster. So if that happens early in this season, and the defense, which is his calling card, is still terrible, and Woody Johnson is not a good guy. He's not a good owner. He's not good at this. You would say, well, let's go get this guy another quarterback. This coach is a good coach. I could see them being the team that pulls a surprise and just once again gets back on the merry-go-round.
So messy at the Jets. Any last ones we want to throw out as the maybe surprises? I mean, Bill Belichick was about as surprising as it came, but although the name was never really uttered. Any other ones out there that people just think?
I've got 2 names for you. Okay, one more likely. Excuse me, Ron Rivera.
I had Ron Rivera down. Yeah. The more I think about Ron Rivera, the more I think to myself, I just expect them to have another average season, and that's not going to be enough. I think unless it's a disaster, they like the man and they like the culture and they like the...
Well, they need a meat shield to protect them from Congress at the moment. So
all of that
if they're not firing the coach until they have a new owner, basically.
Yeah, that's a good deflection. I think the other good deflection, as we talked about last week, is Sam Howell. I think if they get Sam Howell in early and he starts to show a little bit, then I think Rivera could comfortably say, look, this is the journey of travel we're on. The other guy I think is worth bearing in mind, given, not as much of a shit show as what's happening in Washington, but there is certainly some shit show going on, and that's Kevin Stefanski.
That's a good left field one. That is a good left field one.
I think that is a very interesting situation, and just one that kind of...
God, imagine if you're Kevin Stefanski and you allow yourself to sell your soul to the idea of Deshaun Watson, to go out there and, okay, he never endorsed it fully, but he also never came out and said, not sure about this. And then you don't even get to play him for a game because he's suspended and then you get fired. Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me.
It would not.
On the league, couldn't it?
I'm now thinking of writing a column based on Will's inside intel of a Shanahan trade to Cleveland. Prodigal son returns.
I've seen Stranger Things.
That's not bad.
That isn't
bad, guys.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It feels like we need to do a what if podcast of just the absolute out there trades that we could suggest or moves that we could make that would maybe never happen, but would be just earth shattering if they did. Look, as always, like, rate, review, subscribe, all those things you can do over all the various different places. It really does help more people find the show. We really appreciate it. If you have a big question you want us to address one week, we've kind of tackled the hot seat situation this week, then at Gridiron on Twitter, at UK Gridiron on Instagram, fire them in. We will pick out the best ones and do shows on them. And otherwise, look out for the great content, the magazine. I've seen the expected slate for this year, the plans, which obviously all go out the window eventually, but there is some sensational stuff on there that's going to be well worth your time and that very small amount of money you have to pay for such a quality product. So go and check it out. Otherwise, thank you for listening and watching. This has been The Gridiron Show.